Welcome to The Doctor is in Quarantine. In this podcast series, I'm talking to friends and colleagues in the cannabis and horticulture industries to see how they're doing during the COVID-19 crisis. You'll hear conversations about the impacts we've seen so far on the supply and demand of agricultural products and resources, how travel schedules for work and conferences have been upended, and how we're all coping with toilet paper shortages, or not. My guests also give their predictions for the medium and long-term impacts this pandemic may have on our industries and society at large. The general consensus is that it depends a lot on how long the quarantine will last. With that, I invite you to sit back and join the conversation. If you want to share any of your experiences or observations through this crisis, you can find us on Instagram or LinkedIn. Enjoy. In this episode, I'm talking to Dr. Mark Lefsrud, an associate professor at McGill University who leads the Biomass Production Laboratory, where they develop methods and technologies to improve environmental control, energy efficiency, harvesting and post-harvest handling, and really try to help unearth the bioprocesses of living organisms. Some of my listeners might be familiar with his research topic of amber light, which has the potential to upend everything that we know about, say, red and blue light's effects on PAR. Mark is interesting in that he grew up on a farm in Alberta, Canada, where he learned the value of shortening the nutrient cycle between production and waste, a topic that we discuss. So sit back and enjoy a conversation with Dr. Mark Lefsrud.
Hey, Nadia.
Good morning. Oh, I guess it's afternoon now.
Just a bit after, nothing serious.
Okay. Nothing serious. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
I'm doing well. Yeah, we're staying busy. Are you staying busy?
Yeah, we started classes again Monday, so I'm teaching online classes.
So you weren't teaching for a period of time?
Yeah, we had 2-week lockdown. Kicked out of university and not allowed to do. So all classes were suspended for 1 week, and then 2 weeks at the universities and at schools. So we're now trying to figure out how to do things.
Huh. So is that like an early spring break?
So we had spring break before. So we start classes right after New Year's, so on about the 4th or whatever day that was 5th, I think it was, the Monday after. So we started then. So our spring break is actually the first week of March.
So you had spring break and then you had 2 weeks of lockdown?
No, we had spring break and then we were back for 1 week and then we did 2 weeks of lockdown.
Oh, wow. So now you're teaching online classes?
Yeah, so I did my first one yesterday and I have another one tomorrow. But I decided to do it as we've been given flexibility on how we do it, but I'm doing it as a real-time Zoom presentation. And then I record it, and then if people want to watch it afterwards, they can.
Oh, that's really nice. Do you get many people who are actually attending live?
I got 36 on my first. I have only 3 more lectures until the end of the semester. So I had 2 classes. My one class, I'd already presented all the material. It was just students have to give their presentations, and I have to cancel all that now. But for mine, we were over halfway through, obviously, so I just have to wrap things up now.
Well, that's kind of nice.
Yeah.
You have an early semester like that. Have you guys, I don't really know anything about what's going on in Canada. We're obviously like so consumed with what's happening in the US and whether it's organized or not organized here. And, all the states are kind of taking the lead on how to respond. Has Canada had many infections? Are you guys testing people?
Yeah, we're testing. What's our total numbers? So here in Quebec, which is where I'm based, we're the epicenter right now. We became the highest numbers. So we're now the highest numbers. We're currently sitting at 4,611 confirmed.
Just in Quebec?
That's just in Quebec. So we're at 4,000 confirmed cases. If we look at confirmed cases in Canada, Canada's we're just creeping up to 10,000 right now. Okay. So Quebec has the highest number. We're double what Ontario is. So they're about 2,000 below us, but they had spring break after us. So a lot of this is we had the first spring break across Canada, and then Ontario had it the week after us, where we were back in classes. So we think this is one of the reasons why we're ahead of everybody.
Really?
Yeah.
So do you think they're going to catch up, or do you think that somehow they missed that incubation period when you guys all went back to school for that week?
Well, we think we got it all from you guys.
Oh, I'm sure China. You did.
Yeah, or from China or Italy or wherever they were. So we've had cases from basically all parts of the world coming in. So we were the first back, and then we started seeing cases, but it seems to be a high percentage of young people are getting it here in Quebec. Really? And it's because of all the spring breakers and the people who are still going to bars and such, as opposed to other parts of the world, which seems to be circulating more general population. Mm-hmm. But then if you look at our death rate, we're a lot lower than anybody else.
That's interesting. Why do you think that is? Because more young people are getting it and they're able to get through it? Exactly.
So if you look at the stats that says for the rest of the world, people, like there's only been a few cases of people under 20 that have died from it, and under 9, almost zero, like tiny percentages. And then it's not until you get over the age of 60 that the numbers start to go up significantly. So
is your family doing okay?
Yeah, we're in a reasonably nice house and have a property, so I won't say we're in bad shape.
Okay. So you actually have somewhere to roam on your own property without having to worry about social distancing, walking down the sidewalk?
Well, no, we don't have sidewalks where I live.
Oh, okay.
So we have to walk on the road or around our property.
Okay. So, you'd rather risk it with a car than with a person, at least at this point, right? So.
Well, it's also we're suburbia, but not suburbia with sidewalks. So we're kind of what they call sprawl might be the best way to describe it.
Okay.
And the value of sprawl is that you have a quarter of an acre to yourself or a third of an acre, and the roads, everybody walks and plays on the roads anyway. So it's like being in a rural part of the world. So when you're driving, you just have to know that that's what's going to be there.
So you live not really rural, but outside of town. So have you seen much of an effect on your guys' sort of daily life? I mean, obviously, you go to the university. I don't know what your wife does, but does it feel sort of natural anyway, just being at home?
So she's a school teacher. And so the university has been shut down. I actually went in yesterday to get some more supplies I moved some of my experiments to my house.
Really?
And a couple of my students moved their experiments to their house also. So we're doing some experiments at the house, but it's plant growth. So it's not like we're doing high chemical stuff. It's literally just growing plants indoors. And
a new definition for indoor agriculture.
Yeah. But when I was a graduate student, I was doing this all the time, just because I didn't always want to walk into the university. So if it was a quick pre-test, then it made sense to do it. So
okay.
I've set up a couple others for a couple neighbors so that they can start testing for me if they want to.
And that's awesome.
I won't say it's going to be rigorous publishable data, but it's at least testing and seeing how things are working. So I had to go into work and get a few more supplies, and I've authorized my students, if they want to go in and get some supplies to start growing plants at home, go for it. But we're finding that the supply chain is severely inhibited. So trying to get Rockwell cubes is really, really hard now.
I was wondering about that. I mean, so far, most of the people that I've talked to in the US, they haven't felt a disruption in the supply chain yet. But I was curious if in Canada, if you guys source a lot of stuff from outside the country and the borders are locked down and flights can't come in, if you guys are experiencing something different.
So at this point, people going for recreational, non-critical travel is banned. And they're toying with making non-critical travel across Canada being banned also. Like they made the recommendation, if it's not critical, don't travel. But we still have local flights are still happening.
Okay.
There's a few jurisdictions, more remote locations that have gone into full isolation. So there's no flights going in and they set up checkpoints.
Oh, wow.
the border is still running, so they're still trucking things around. When I'm out on the road, it is a reduced traffic load out there, but you still see the truckers hauling things around and moving things around. So, and there's been a bunch of processes that have been considered essential. So I drove past like a hotel, actually where our conference was at, and there's nobody there. And there's a bunch of strip malls along the way, and they're all vacated. But then I go to a shipping and receiving operation, and their parking lot's almost completely full.
Wow.
So, and they ship medical supplies and other supplies.
Well, yeah.
So they're flat out. Like, I don't know if they could move much faster than they probably are right now.
Wow. Are you guys able to get medical supplies?
We've been watching the U.S. news, and I'd say a fair bit of it is there's a lot of people, I think, yelling and screaming because they want to be heard. And Canada doesn't like doing that as a whole. The Canadian culture is not one that if you're down to 2 weeks supply, that we're still going to yell and scream. So we are having a harder time getting supplies, but I won't say that we're carrying on and making it as big a news story as other parts of the world are.
Okay.
So don't get me wrong, we're short of everything, but we're also ramping up places that can start production. So one of the hockey equipment manufacturers is now making medical supplies kind of stuff. So
that's so awesome.
And every distillery I know out there is now trying to make hand sanitizer and other cleaning products. So they're flat out on that. And we're similar to the US in that we have provincial jurisdiction, so that's the same as state as well as federal jurisdiction. And health, though, falls under the jurisdiction of the provinces. It doesn't fall under federal jurisdiction. So each province has the authority to do what they want. So each province is doing different levels of isolation or a few places are doing quarantines, but that's kind of rare. More is we don't have any true stay-at-home orders in the true sense, but highly recommended that you don't go out unless you absolutely have to, kind of things.
Right. Yeah, it's been interesting here in the US how it kind of started locally, then grew to the statewide, and then obviously, federally there's pressure for the federal government to make sort of a blanket statement that says everybody just stay home because, I think the map that I saw last night, something like 30 or 40 states do have a shelter in place or quarantine order, but there's a lot of pockets that haven't. And what I find really interesting is that it's not sort of grouped states together. It's like one rebel state and the, surrounded by other states that have quarantine that don't have it. And it just makes me think how they're almost like this keystone in a way that all roads could point to them if they don't self-isolate or quarantine.
So our big argument and what the government pushed for and what McGill actually closed shop a day before than we were told we were supposed to is purely because we're trying to reduce the challenge for the healthcare system. But following the curves and listening to all the people who are doing modeling on this, everybody's going to have to get sick, or if we're lucky, we're going to get vaccinated. But it's not like at the numbers that we're sitting at now, I don't think there's going to be much of a potential of stopping it dead, personally.
Right.
But it will be recurring and slowly coming back and forth. So we're trying to control it at a certain level. But the challenge ends up becoming is what percentage of infection rate is the medical profession able to handle? And then how do we play with that number? Because if we go full lockdown, but you're in a place like North Dakota, which has very, very low numbers, and a reasonably good healthcare system, then maybe that's too aggressive for them. And so I'm not bothered by the patchwork mentality because some jurisdictions possibly could run and can deal with the numbers and other places can't. So it almost has to be a local decision.
That's a good point. Yeah, I just keep wondering, how many of us have actually been exposed to it? How many of us have actually had it pass through us, whether it was asymptomatic or low symptoms? And one question I don't know, maybe you know the answer to, but I haven't heard this, is like with the testing, does it test you that you have it, but does it also test that you did have it? And that if you had it, you're no longer, infectious?
Yeah, two different tests. So right now, Quebec is predominantly doing the nasal swab, and that's measuring if you're shedding the virus, so you're infected and sick,
Okay.
is what they're testing for. So they're testing for the virus presence in your body and the fact that you're shedding it. If you're pre that state, there's no test for it because it's too low of numbers. Like, I don't know how low they can go, but if you're not shedding, it's really hard to find.
Okay.
Might be possible to find it, but it's really hard. But then there's an antibody, and those tests are just starting now.
Okay.
But I don't know
that you did have it, and now you have the antibodies to fight it.
Yeah, and I know that people say that they have those, but I don't think those have ramped up at all. So
it's just like, how long does this last? I mean, do we all have to wait to be tested, or wait till we have a vaccine? I mean, when do we get to see each other again?
Well, if we were on Zoom Face, I'd see you right now. So.
Good call. I've learned that Zoom video through this, at least my level of subscription, does not support good video. And in fact, there's a warning when I log in that says, if you are planning to use video with 3 or more people, then you're going to have crappy quality. And I've learned that even just with one other person, it's crappy quality. So that's why we're just doing audio.
Yeah. So because McGill has now a full package for it, obviously we're being given the top stuff. So
Right. So I should have had you host the call.
Yeah, I was told I'm not supposed to for things other than for education. So
that's fair. Okay. Has it been hard switching to online teaching, or because kind of where you're at with your classes anyway, it wasn't too much of a challenge?
Well, a couple of years ago, I had a health issue, and I actually was bedridden for a couple months. And so I did a bunch of this from bed already. So,
wow.
So when they told me I had to do this again, I'm like, "Ooh, I can do this. Already done it once." So it's not, and I'd say most people, it was kind of scary initially, but so far, everybody I've chatted with at McGill seems to be adapting reasonably well, and the students are taking it quite well. Like when I was doing my online, before I did it through Skype, so they just broadcast it in the classroom.
Okay.
And it worked okay, and I had a camera set up so I could see the class, but not everyone. Now I have everybody's face if they want, or at least and I see who's all attending. I understand that some might be plural or people aren't there. But then I also have I run a second laptop, which gives me it as a student view. And then I have the chat box. And so people, instead of having the voice, I'm the only one talking and everybody else is typing me questions furiously. And so then I'm trying to answer them and make it real time. So I found it's been quite good and reasonably dynamic. In some ways, maybe more dynamic than a classroom because they have the ability to communicate continuously to me, and I don't have to completely stop the class to answer their questions. Like I can be responding to people, or the other students can be responding. So in some ways, it's more dynamic than I was expecting it to be.
That's really interesting. I would totally expect the opposite, and maybe it's because it's an actual class. I mean, I feel like, when you attend a webinar or a conference call, that it can be easy to get distracted by, I don't know, the people around you or your phone going off or whatever. And so it can be harder to be engaged or focus on someone speaking remotely than if you are actually in a room full of people watching a presentation. But that's interesting. And it probably brings down a barrier of people even being embarrassed or, just afraid to raise their hand or speak out and ask a question. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I found it. I was surprised at how well it went. A few of the students had their web cameras on so I can see their faces. Nice. And I warned them beforehand that if your camera's on, if you're picking your nose, I see you. So does everybody else. So be aware that this is live.
Has that happened yet?
I have not seen that one, but there is people who you have the kid running around behind or the cat who's jumping onto the person's face wanting to get petted and stuff. And I haven't seen those ones. So those things happen. So
I have found it somewhat refreshing to be in some of these conference calls during this where we do see people's camera, or people see them on the screen, and just how casual everyone is. People are wearing sweatshirts. I'm sure they're wearing yoga pants or boxers or something, or sweatpants. They have their hair up. They're not all made up. You see their fur babies or their real babies in the background, and maybe their partner walks by. And it's just, I find it really refreshing because people just aren't sort of keeping up appearances. Everyone is in the same boat and everyone's working from home. And so why do we need to pretend that we're not?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Well, I was doing it all in bed, because that's where I had always done it before when I had my health issue. And people are like, well, I don't know if I quite like the idea of you being in bed. And I'm like, well, so I can sit up and then looks like I'm not in bed, but I don't see the difference. I am dressed. I have khakis and a golf shirt on, so I'm professional, but okay.
More importantly, do you have a Canada Dry in your hand?
I do not have a Canada Dry in my hand. Okay.
Well, and also, haven't you heard that you're supposed to create separation between like your living and your workspace, so that you don't have anxiety when you go to bed?
Oh, the problem with a professor is ultimately it's all one big smudge anyway. So
yeah, I hear you.
So right now, at any given moment, I am, well, I'm running a lot of projects. So we brought 8 projects home. So I am running 8 individual, I have 3 in my house. And then I have students that are running the other 5 at their places. So it's not like the work-life balance. Like I go for a walk every day, so I'm trying to separate, but it's not like I've ever had a good separation. My wife, if I'm not doing my research and growing my plants, then I don't know what I'm doing. Like that's half of my identity completely. My family and other things being the other half, but it's not like people wake up in the morning and are be anxious about doing something, and I'm checking to make sure my things are running properly, not because I'm scared that they're going to die, but because I really want to see what the response is. Like this is fun for me. So
can you please publish a paper of like doing these experiments at home versus doing them in like a controlled laboratory setting to see like what the differences are, and if there are differences? It would be such an interesting case study, actually, if somebody or multiple people did something like that, like, having these controlled experiments versus less controlled experiments.
Yeah. Well, we did do a run like that with the NCR 101 about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and they tested a bunch of different chambers to see how close they could all grow. And in the end, it was surprisingly poor.
What was surprisingly poor? Like they didn't compare well, or things didn't grow well?
Yeah, the repeatability of the results. So if I'm growing, just because of the water, that the localized water, or the maybe the bulbs are slightly different age, slightly different lot on the seed that you're using, temperature, humidity slightly different. They were larger differentials than we were expecting, like not less than 10%, like greater than 10%.
Small changes make a big difference.
Yeah.
I did not know that, but it makes sense.
Yeah.
There's too many variables. You can't control them all.
Yeah. We find that, and it's one of the big arguments, like with organic growers versus non-organic people, and you can do it through controlled environment. The people who are more attentive, obviously, will almost always have better plants.
Of course.
And so usually the organic people are more passionate, and so they're more attentive. And I'm not saying that their plants aren't good. I'm just saying that if I take a highly attentive, good grower who's doing conventional versus somebody who's organic, I can't tell the difference personally. And I haven't ever been able to tell the difference. But if you take somebody who's doing conventional and they're non-attentive, or organic non-attentive, now all bets are off. And I've seen those systems too. So no. Speak to the. I'm using speak in the general terms, but understand what the plant is trying to communicate to you when it does certain things.
So okay, good segue to agriculture. So have you? I mean, I have a couple questions. One is just about general ag and horticulture, and then one, of course, about cannabis. which is also legal in Canada. I guess we can start with the cannabis question. Is cannabis deemed essential in Canada?
At this point, it's fallen under the agriculture, and they kept the dispensaries open.
Okay.
There was a run on them, so they've had higher sales than they've probably ever had.
Yeah.
Out of this, because everybody knew they were going to be locked in their house for a while, and higher consumption. People like using it for a stress relief, so I can see that happening. Most of the facilities, this was last week, so I don't know what's happened this week, but last week, almost all the facilities I knew of were still running.
Yeah. Huh. I wonder if consumption will go up during these lockdowns, and I'm also curious if more new users, if more people will try it for the first time because they can, or because they're curious, or because they're sick of their beer gut, or because they're not afraid of drug testing or something like that. I'm super curious what'll happen with cannabis.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer, but I know that, so almost all the cannabis companies I've chatted with, that's 3 total. So I won't say a lot.
Yeah.
And they said they were surprised at how quickly they were selling out. Like they're not ahead of it right now in most cases.
Oh, wow. Is there a cannabis delivery service in Canada?
So Canada Post, our national carrier, is the only one that's allowed to ship cannabis by shipping.
Huh.
Otherwise, it has to be through either medical dispensaries, through the, I guess, pharmacy theoretically,
right,
as well as people who are growing it themselves. But everybody in Canada has the right to grow, I want to say 3 plants.
Okay.
Maybe 4. I think it's 3 plants specifically. So people are growing these for themselves. And then if you get a medical, so if it's licensed as a medical, then that's the number that can be basically certified for that. So I know some people who are up to have the right to grow, I think it's 75 plants if they're making them into smoothies and things like that.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so the cannabis industry is doing well so far. How's the horticulture industry, the ag industry? Can you remind me? So, what are some of the major agricultural and horticultural products produced in Canada, and are they running full tilt yet? I imagine it's a little bit colder where you are still in April. Have people planted seeds in the ground? Are greenhouses operating?
Yeah, so we have 3, I'd say 3 levels. So there's the full controlled environment group. So that's the converted shipping containers or full high production greenhouses. And they grow all year round. So we have a company that's a rooftop greenhouse company here in Quebec called Lufa, as well as like Savoura tomatoes. And we have a bunch of other companies that are scattered around Quebec, a whole boatload in Ontario, lower mainland of British Columbia, and a smattering Alberta and other places that have greenhouses. And they're predominantly bell peppers, cucumbers, and tomatoes. And those are greenhouse operations. They usually shut down in January. If they are going to shut down, but then they're back to production. So they're full production right now.
Okay.
And our big thing is that because electrical costs are quite low in this part of the world, at least Quebec, the greenhouse operation basically maximize yield for the off seasons of what the rest of the world is doing. So when California and Mexico are at their lower production, that's usually when we try to ramp up our highest.
Okay.
For those ones. Then there's some that are kind of semi-controlled, and they've been slowly ramping themselves up now also, so they've been getting some production. And then we have our field production, and field in this part of the world, and maybe Southern Ontario is doing something, but I doubt it. In this part, our ground is still frozen and we still have snow on the ground. So it's not like we can do any production yet. But in about a month, we will have, actually less than a month, probably in about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, the ground will be thawed enough that we can actually start production. So we'll start seeding, and there'll be some horticultural, but also our standard cash crops, as well as our cereal grains and other crops that we can put into those. And so those will start ramping themselves up. So people who are going to be doing like onions, they've already started pre-germination on those. Some of the tomatoes have already started going pre-germination, so that we're ready for the planting that's going to happen in about a month from now.
Okay. And so they, as far as you know, none of those farmers have had a problem receiving supplies. You mentioned rock wool was hard to come by.
Yeah.
What's happening with the greenhouse growers who need rock wool?
There's still, I'm not positive about them specifically. I do know that most of the farmers would have been prepping, and the supply companies would have been prepping up until about March. So they're still asking for stuff, and there'll still be shipments of them. So there might be some shortages. My brother works as a farmer out in Western Canada, and he's been selling he's a seed grower, so he sells the grain to the farmers. And there's been a lot of requests for grain as a normal season. So it's curious how the purchases of grain seem to be differing this year from previous years, and it's based on what the going prices are. So for some reason, because of China has put an embargo on buying canola from us, which is like an oilseed crop.
Yeah.
Most people are staying out of the canola and going to other crops because of that. So China is not playing fair by any stretch, and we know this. So we're just going to other crops to fill the other demands.
It's interesting. I have a friend in South Carolina who grows hemp on, hectares of land, and they converted some of their land this year to tomato and okra because, one, they're not really sure what's going to happen with hemp demands, and also because they feel like under this crisis that tomatoes and okra will be in higher demand and that they'll have more of a consumer market for those products.
That's my latest rant that I've actually been going off on here, is that our challenge right now is because we locked down the border, Canadians as a whole, so there's a percentage, something under 5% are primary farmers. Total food production, let's say around 20% of the population. But if we're doing large scale agriculture with machinery, we can run that. Like the farmers can operate that, the milk producers, dairy board, chicken producers and such can run that. But our field agriculture, we use a lot of temporary labor coming from other countries, predominantly Central America. And we can probably get most of the crop into the ground, but we're not going to be able to harvest a lot of it unless we get this labor. And that's local. If we're going down to California or Washington State, Oregon State, the primary food producing regions that we import from, Florida and the Carolinas kind of stuff. So the southern edges seem to be where we get most of it from. Arizona smattering too. We're going to be, if the labor doesn't come in and harvest this, we're going to have a shortage of a lot of these things. So the controlled environment space is not a bad place to be in because we can meet the demand for tomatoes and cucumbers and peppers. But if we're going to be looking for grapes, that's not something we're good at producing. We usually import that from other parts of the world, Chile, the United States, other places. And if we go through some of our other produce, it's almost always sourced outside. So if the supply chains stay open, we can probably use it. But if we're needing migrant workers to fill these demands to harvest this, I don't know where that's going to come. So it wouldn't surprise me. I went looking to try to buy some grapes, and the price is now $8 a bunch. Normally it'd be sitting at $3 to $5 a bunch at worst. So I'm seeing the produce costs are going up quite significantly.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I have been wondering about that, if the labor shortages are going to affect either seeding or harvest. Once you have the seed in the ground, it's like, okay, it's not like you do nothing, but you're letting the plant grow, and you probably don't need as much labor to let the plant grow and produce. But then once you get to that harvest, and even the food processing and post-harvest and all the things that are associated with harvesting that crop, how does that happen? Can people go out and pick their own? Can they keep 6-foot separation and let people pick their own?
Well, we do have the U-pick gardens and places like that, but
it just be at a massive scale.
Yeah, this is going to take a change of, like, the idea of having local food has slowly been building. I've been seeing
Yeah.
So trying not to import. And so, but we've been chatting with local butchers and they've never seen this much consumption ever locally.
Wow.
And so then the challenge is that, like, there's been some people that say, well, I go to the grocery store and it looks like people are hoarding. I don't actually, in some cases they are, so I can't say for all, but there's some cases where people just had half a day to 1 day worth of food supply in their house. And now they need to have 1 week worth of supply or 2 weeks worth of supply. And so instead of going and buying a basket, they're buying 2 carts worth.
Yeah.
And then people say, well, look at you, you're hoarding. And I'm like, no, I'm just filling up my pantry, which has never been full. So trying to shift this dynamics is going to take a lot of work. Like, I don't think this is a 1 year. Like, if we're going to stay in this kind of semi-lockdown home isolation kind of thing, we got years worth of challenges to try to do this. Like, controlled environment agriculture is going to have to basically step up tenfold, maybe higher. Can we replace all of Chilean, Argentina, Mexico's supply or at least a large portion of that within the next couple of years? And I don't know. Like, this is serious challenges ahead of us.
I mean, grow local, supporting your local farmer and community with jobs and all these things has been one of the sort of central messages of a lot of people touting the benefits of vertical farms and controlled environment agriculture in general. Do you think that this magnifies that push? Do you think this demonstrates that controlled environment ag can meet that local need, and that there is advantages to growing local beyond just reducing the carbon footprint of the truck, the semi truck traveling 3,000 miles from California? I mean, I feel like all those naysayers who are like, yeah, but the energy you use to operate this vertical farm far exceeds the carbon footprint of that truck. But I feel like none of those naysayers ever took into account something like this crisis.
No, agreed. And it's going to change. I think the longer we do it, the more it's going to change things. I've always modeled my research and my life looking back at my great-grandfather and then my grandfather. And my great-grandfather, obviously, he was post-U.S. Civil War, but he went through a bunch of other war periods and then came into North America. He was from Norway originally, so he came across on these things. And a lot of the things that happened under my grandfather, pre-First World War kind of things, I'd say were sustainable. I won't say they're well understood, but we applied the fertilizer back to the field. We had to have a certain level of animals on the field for egg production and milk, but it wasn't just for that. Like, people say, well, it's a meat consumption thing. It was also the fact that we needed to recycle those nutrients. So after I have my kitchen scrap, people would compost, but it was better to have a pig there because now you had a pig eating on it. You could get the meat from it. But then you also had that manure, which you could then use, which has been pre-processed, can be used as a fertilizer source. And so is there a way that we can start shortening those nutrient cycles and those recycling cycles? Obviously, plastic is one of the great challenges out of that, but if we're doing paper and I'm feeding it to a cow, the cow can eat it and actually uses it a bit of energy. I won't say it's great energy by them, but it's not something that is terminal like plastic is. So there's going to have to be a challenge of trying to link together these cycles to try to, instead of taking the supply chain from, I'm picking on Mexico, but basically from Mexico and bringing all their produce up here, is there a way that we can recycle the nutrients faster at the local so that we can get food production, manure management, all these things done? And I personally feel that that period before the First World War had a reasonably good understanding of how to do that. And we've forgotten a lot of that. Yeah. And we have to figure out how to do that again.
I love that. Shorten the nutrient cycle. That's provocative for sure. It sounds like you guys probably aren't wasteful people anyway, but have you noticed if your own personal food waste or just waste in general has reduced during this short period we've experienced already?
Well, I'm one of these people I was raised on a farm where anything that was left over became soup. So
nice.
My dad was a big fanatic and still is a big fanatic of specialty soups of whatever was left over. So I'm quite good at being able to manage the fridge and not do food waste. Plus, we have a benefit that we have a little guinea pig that eats a lot of our peelings and such like that. So
nice.
So we try to keep that nutrient cycle as low as possible. As a kid growing up on a farm, I would have pigs also, and it was a way to get rid of all of our garden or our kitchen waste products. I never had to compost. I just fed it all to the pigs. So I've never felt that I was poor, and I mean like poor as in like a poor understanding of that cycling system.
Right.
But this is starting to highlight it and I run into people that go, look how good I am. I have such a low carbon footprint. But then you go hang out with them and you're like, you do know that those things aren't low carbon footprint steps. Like people come to me and say, well, I bought a Tesla car and look how low the carbon footprint is. Great. That's the electricity you're buying. But if you're in a place like Colorado that uses coal power to generate your electricity, you're now no longer a low carbon footprint.
That's right.
And you have to understand that the lithium ion batteries have a challenge and all these other things have a challenge. So you want a low carbon footprint, have a horse. I'm sorry, but
we're going to go back to horses.
Yeah.
I mean, it is interesting though, when you mentioned plastic, and I don't know what the right adjective is, but I'll just use the word interesting that, they've shown that the virus can live on paper, cardboard, right, for 24 hours, but on plastic for several days.
Yeah.
And it's just like, that age-old question, paper or plastic, well, suddenly that doesn't become an option anymore. And it also just sort of demonstrates the evil, if I can use that word, of plastic, that it's not really doing us any favors with our health.
No, well, and so, but there's a double split to that one. And so the first one is, so the reusable bag, which everybody goes, is the perfect one.
Right. Yeah.
I've been to stores now that they're not willing to accept them. Period.
Yeah, they won't here in California.
Yeah. So, but then the paper plastic thing is paper from a carbon recycling. Paper's nothing wrong with it. It works well from a carbon recycling process. And I'm meaning that from a more general, not whether or not we do it, but the fact that we can do it.
Yeah.
The plastic becomes a larger challenge because we don't have a good way of recycling that material.
Yeah.
But if you're wanting to deal with single-use materials like in a hospital, plastic is what's going to keep us isolated and separated. So we have to understand that for certain foods, we want plastic. But wrapping cheeses in plastic, I've always thought was kind of insane because it's a living thing.
It's mold. You
exactly.
want it to breathe. Yeah.
So wrapping in plastic, basically you've isolated it and it's no longer that thing. If you're dealing with packages of milk, cardboard works perfectly well for this. So there is ways, and that's why I'm saying go back to history and see how we did it in the past and choose the ones that might not be the most ideal from a carbon standpoint, but might be the most ideal from a nutrient recycling standpoint. Or a management standpoint. And so we have to, as a society, sit down and say, okay, plastic for hospitals, brilliant, carry on. Plastic for packaging cheese, let's say that's stupid and don't allow that anymore.
You heard it here first.
Yeah.
I'm also really curious about what happens with the food system in general. I mean, I'm hearing that some farmers are doing well, maybe even better, like you mentioned earlier, whether it's cannabis or some certain products, because there's a greater demand for it. But in other cases, because people aren't going out to restaurants or even taking an airplane, we don't even realize that, the pretzels and the nuts and the meals that we eat on an airplane and in that hotel when we're on the go, that they all get their food from somewhere, that we don't just buy food at the grocery store, and not many people cook anymore, I don't think. I
think that's changed this last week. I have a sister-in-law that I don't know if she'd cooked more than 2 meals in her life. Maybe she'll yell at me for that. She'll probably say a few more, but she'll admit that she had a hard time boiling water. And all of a sudden, the last couple of weeks, that's all they've been doing.
Mm-hmm.
and
Exactly.
so they've had to shift to. And I know she's a smart, very capable young lady, and so I'm positive she's become really, really good at it.
And we have more time to do it. I am hoping that people are finding the joy in cooking. I'm really lucky. I mean, we cook. We eat most of our meals at home anyway, though I will admit the first week it was hard, that little thing in my brain that's like, okay, it's been a long day. Let's go out and not make dinner, and somebody can make dinner and clean the dishes for us, right? That now sort of that has gone away. I feel like that was almost a habit that is, that's going away. But, also without those outlets, will farmers, and certain farmers might fare better than others, have other outlets to sell? And grocery stores have been designed over the years of people eating less at home, right, and eating more out, and they can't keep their shelves full, obviously, as we were talking about. Even with produce, we're seeing limited supplies or amounts of produce, not as much in California probably as other places.
Flour has disappeared from almost all the shelves around here.
I guess everyone's decided to bake. We can't find sugar. We don't really eat a lot of sugar, but still, I'm just surprised that there's no sugar.
Yeah, sugar I can still find a little bit. Flour disappeared almost immediately. Yes. They've now restocked. The part I'm finding amusing is you go to the grocery store and there's one kind of flour now.
Really?
Well, because it used to be all these different versions of it, but if they're going to get sold out, it's hard to restock all versions. So we're going to supply you with the major one. And we know that you're going to get bought out. We couldn't find yeast all of a sudden also because people have been making bread at home.
People are making their own bread.
Yeah.
Well, I love this. I mean, people are going to create new hobbies and just, I don't know. Hopefully this sticks. Hopefully when this is all over, people don't just, run out of the kitchen and back out to restaurants all the time. Nothing against restaurateurs. I have nothing against food service. I like eating a nice meal out for sure. But I do hope that attitudes change and people, find enjoyment in cooking. And I really appreciate Ina Garden and all the other people who are posting videos and recipes on how to cook. That's so awesome.
Well, I'm curious because everybody called the people so my great-grandparents were basically the pre-war people, and they were listed as the greatest generation. And they did it because they went through the hardship of the 30s and they went through 2 world wars and such. And I'm curious whether or not this time period that we're going through right now is going to do the same thing to millennials, basically turn them into our great-grandparents from a social standpoint, an understanding of how communities have to work together and such like that. And it gives promise. I'm not like it is a dark period, but there's also promising things that are coming out of it. Like people are behaving at some level of isolation and they're trying to rally together to try to solve some of these things. And people are still, who would have thought that we would have listed a grocery store worker as a frontline worker? Like I never would have guessed that. And they get clapped. So it's like they get celebrated, which I think is awesome.
It's super awesome. It is, because they're risking their lives by being exposed to us and all the things that they're putting on the shelves every single day. It's amazing. So I have to ask you this question. Do you guys have enough toilet paper?
Well, a perk that we have is that Quebec has a lot of toilet paper manufacturers because we have a lot of really big Yeah. So I went to the store. They were sold out. And you're only allowed to buy 2 rolls of, 12, so 24 rolls at a time you're only allowed to buy.
Okay.
And it's only one company that's supplying, but if you go to a different store, it's one company supplying. So that's why I'm saying the variability is decreased, but we're not lacking of toilet paper here.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So basically you're saying we need to open the border just so we can get toilet paper into the US. Forget Rockwall. We need toilet paper. Can we make a trade? I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough.
That is hilarious. Okay, so you guys are not lacking toilet paper. Well, lucky you. Lucky for us, we were pretty stocked up before it started. And my mom is, was super concerned. Before anyone went down on lockdown, just even the hint that there might be a lockdown, my mom went out to the grocery store and bought, a month's supply of food. And, we were kind of making fun of her, like, where are you going to put all of this? Your pantry's already full. Your freezer's full of all these, like fresh delivered meals that are frozen now and not fresh. And, but you have a little bit of your mom in you, and it was like, we have plenty of toilet paper, but I'm just going to buy another package just in case. And that's the last time we've been able to buy toilet paper.
Oh, wow.
Like a month ago. So
okay.
Thank you, Mom, for being paranoid. Right.
Yeah, you can, when I go to the grocery store, I'm finding it interesting, or the store, because you can see which ones are local. So like, we're not going to run out of maple syrup. We're good here in Quebec for that. Toilet paper, we're good too. And so, but you can see like grapes, that's going to be an issue for us because we don't grow that here, at least not for table consumption. We have plenty of wine, but we don't have it from the table consumption perspective.
All you need is wine. I mean, let's face it. I mean, we are definitely lucky to be in California. We are not going to be lacking any sort of fresh produce anytime soon, which I can't say the same for a lot of other states. So how do you like your lighter travel schedule? The last time I saw you was in San Diego, and then we were both supposed to be in Tucson together a few weeks later, and that obviously got canceled. And we always seem to end up at the same shows. I asked that question, when are we going to see each other again, besides, through a Zoom video?
Yeah. Well, we have the next conference, I think, is in September. So we'll probably see you there.
Well, there's ASABE in July, which I wonder if they'll keep that.
Yeah, I'm going to bet money they're going to shut that one down.
Me too.
We had the one in June, that the CIGR, so the International Agriculture Engineering Society, and CSB, which is the Canadian version of it. And we shut that one was canceled last week. So.
Do you think those events will actually happen in the fall?
That one's been postponed, I think, a year. So some of them will get canceled and some will get postponed.
Yeah. That's what I'm wondering. I mean, I don't know. I mean, everyone says that it's going to die down in the summer. I don't know if that's true or not, and maybe that's just being hopeful. But then, all these other conferences, I have several that were rescheduled for September and October and November, and I don't know if they'll actually happen, if I want to go to them, and then they're saying that it might flare back up in the winter. So I don't know.
Well, I'm wondering if they're like our hockey, basketball, football, all the major sports, as well as all the conferences, they're all going to be trying to condense. If we come back and they're trying to condense it all into one period, it's going to be overload for us. Like, could they theoretically have NFL, NBA, NHL, Major League Baseball, all overlaid at the exact same time?
Oh my God. That's all we're going to be watching. Well, you know what? We're going to be out of Netflix shows, so we might as well just watch sports all the time.
Yeah. And that doesn't even include the big ones like IndyCar racing and tennis major tournaments like Wimbledon. Like, how are we going to pack all these things together?
Yeah. I mean, the other day, so one of our guilty pleasures, I don't know if people would think this is a guilty pleasure, but we'll just put golf on like a Saturday or Sunday morning. It's kind of nice background, and we kind of like listening to the double entendres by the announcer. And it was on last weekend, and I was like, there's a golf tournament? And Marcy's like, no, from 2019. And I was like, oh. I was wondering why all those people were assembled together. How could they do that? So we're watching a lot of reruns, I guess.
We're critiquing all the commercials because people are giving hugs to each other that we know that aren't family. So
it's so weird. We watched Blade Runner over the weekend. I don't know if you've seen that movie, but they're in a wet market, basically. I think in Japan, it looks like Japanese writing, and all these people are together, and all the animals with the people, and then they're in the bar, and it was so cringeworthy. It was so hard to watch that part. like, forget the rest of the movie. It was just watching all these people in close proximity with each other and with animals. And it was just like, ugh. Like, when are we ever going to, I imagine we will get over it eventually, but how long will that take? It's a strange feeling.
Well, Spanish flu, it took them quite a while. It went through 3 phases. So,
well, are you enjoying not traveling as much?
I wanted to go to Arizona. I really did.
I did too. I was going to spend 3 weeks in Arizona because I had a conference, the NCRA in Tucson, and then 2 weeks later I had a conference in Phoenix. So we were going to stay in a friend's cottage, and we are going to take our cat with us, and we are just going to get some Arizona sunshine for 3 weeks. And I am a little sad that trip in general got canceled, but it also feels good to be at home.
Yeah, well, my kids are getting a little stir crazy, I'm noticing.
How old are your kids?
11 down to 9 or 8. Yeah.
So are you homeschooling?
Well, my wife is a teacher, so.
Oh, so she's got it? Okay.
So she's doing some of it, but then last night we started pre-seeding for our garden. So we spent a good 2 hours setting up cubes and pre-seeding. And then I brought home a few sample things that I'm testing. So we're seeing how well we work with that porous concrete and seeing if we get what our lettuce will turn out on that. We've grown it before, but now my kids are in charge of it. So it's a slightly different challenge.
What a good science experiment for them.
Exactly.
Yeah. So many learning opportunities. We have a little mini 3-level vertical farm in our office. So it just came to full bloom. It's been about 4 weeks since we germinated. We have arugula and romaine and butter lettuce and basil. The basil will take a while still. But so this week, we're just like, okay, we have to start harvesting. What are we going to do with all this produce? So, of course, we're eating some, taking some to Marcia's mom. And then we have some friends and family. One of my coworkers were like, Lydia, you need to come to the office and get some of this lettuce, that you planted. So her husband came by, and our office is on the 2nd floor. And so Marcia bagged up, like 5 or 6 Ziplocs of lettuce, put it in a paper bag, and then dropped it down to Lydia's husband in his truck, and then he drove away.
Oh, nice.
So we're literally doing drop-offs. Drop off the balcony. Get your lettuce.
Well, I have strawberries, but nothing serious enough that I can feed anybody yet. But my kids go down and get a strawberry a day in our little garden system downstairs. So
nice. Well, this was really fun to talk to you.
Likewise.
Thank you for your perspectives from so many angles of your experience and being in Canada. I do think that a lot of people are going to be really interested in your thoughts, and
I hope I don't get in too much trouble for anything that I said. I tried not to say anything too controversial. So.
You save that for the conferences when you talk about Amber Light. That's really controversial.
I'm trying to push it one step farther, but That's another conversation.
Okay, excellent. I am in full support. So
we're trying to get a paper published, but we're having challenges because people don't accept our underlying argument. So
really?
Yeah.
Well, people keep inviting you back to talk. So I think people like the controversy.
Yeah, fair enough.
All right, Mark. Well, talk to you in a couple hours, and thank you again. This was
problem.
Fun.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, Mark. That concludes my conversation with Dr. Mark Lefsrud, Associate Professor at McGill, who now conducts research from the comfort of his home with the help of his new interns, his kids. I really am curious to know how his home research findings might compare to more controlled laboratory tests. If the growth chamber experiment is any indication, they may not be too far off from each other. I found it interesting to learn that his students are more engaged attending classes online. I wonder if other teachers or professors have had the same experience. I was glad to learn that the closed border with the U.S. hasn't yet impacted greenhouse and horticultural supplies, but rock wool may become a pretty hot commodity if the borders aren't opened in the near future. Since Quebec apparently has 5 toilet paper factories, I really do think there's a trade opportunity here. Rock wool for toilet paper? Thanks, Mark, for the fun conversation about life on the farm, at the university, and in Canada.